Locomotion and movement. In this chapter, we will read about types of movement, muscles, skeletal system, joints, disorders of muscular and skeletal system. Movement is one of the significant features of living beings. Animals and the plants exhibit a wide range of movements. Streaming of protoplasm is in the unicellular organism like amoeba is a simple form of movement. Movement of cilia, flagella, and tentacles are shown by many organisms. Human beings can move limbs, jaws, eyelids, tongue, etc. Some of the movements result in the change of place or location. Such voluntary movements are called locomotion. Walking, running, climbing, flying, swimming are all some forms of locomotory movements. Locomotory structures need not be different from those affecting other types of movements. For example, in paramecium, cilia helps in the movement of food through cytopharynx and in locomotion as well. Hydra can use its tentacles for capturing its prey and use them for locomotion. We use limbs for changes in the body postures and locomotion as well. The above observation suggests that movement and locomotion cannot be studied separately. The two may be linked by stating that all locomotions are movement but all movements are not locomotions. Method of locomotion performed by animals vary with their habitats and the demand of the situation. However, locomotion is generally for search of food, shelter, mate, suitable breeding grounds, favorable climatic condition, or to escape from enemies and the predators. Types of movement. Cells of the human body exhibit three main types of movement, namely amoeboid, ciliary, and the muscular. Some specialized cells in our body like macrophages and the leukocytes in the blood exhibit amoeboid movement. It is affected by the pseudopodia formed by the streaming of protoplasm that as in the amoeba. Cytoskeletal elements like microfilaments are also involved in the amoeboid movement. Ciliary movement occurs in most of our internal tubular organs which are lined by ciliated epithelium. The coordinated movement of cilia in the trachea help us in removing dust particle and the some of the foreign substances inhaled along with the atmospheric air. Passage of ova through the female reproductive tract is also facilitated by the ciliary movement. Movement of our limbs, jaws, tongue, etc. require muscular movement. The contractile property of muscles are effectively used for locomotion and other movement by the human beings and the majority of multicellular organisms. Locomotion requires a perfect coordinated activity of muscular, skeletal, and neural system. In this chapter, you will learn about the types of muscles, their structure, mechanism of their contraction, and important aspect of a skeletal system. Muscle. You have studied in the chapter 8 that the cilia and the flagella are the outgrowth of the cell membrane. Flagellar movement help in the swimming of spermatozoa, maintenance of water current in the canal system of sponges, and in locomotion of protozoa like euglena. Muscle is a specialized tissue of mesodermal origin. About 40 to 15% of the body weight of the human adult is contributed by the muscles. They have special properties like excitability, contractibility, extensibility, and elasticity. Muscles have been classified using different criteria, namely locomotion, location, appearance, and the nature of regulation of their activities. Based on their location, three types of muscles are identified: skeletal muscles, visceral, and the cardiac. Skeletal muscles are closely associated with the skeletal components of the body. They have stripped appearance under the microscope and hence are called striated muscles. As their activities are under the voluntary control of the nervous system, they are known as the voluntary muscles too. They are primarily involved in the locomotory action and changes of the body postures. Visceral muscles are located in the inner wall of the hollow visceral organs of the body like alimentary canal, reproductive tract, etc. They do not exhibit any striation and are smooth in appearance. Hence, they are called the smooth muscles or non-striated muscles. Their activities are not under the voluntary control of the nervous system and are therefore known as involuntary muscles. They assist, for example, in transportation of food through the digestive tract and gamete through the genital tract. As the name suggests, cardiac muscles are the muscles of heart. Many cardiac muscle cells assemble in a branching pattern to form a cardiac muscles. Based on appearance, cardiac muscles are striated. They are involuntary in nature as the nervous system does not control their activities directly. Let us examine a skeletal muscle in detail to understand the structure and the mechanism of contraction. Each organized skeletal muscles in our body is made of a number of muscle bundles or fascicles held together by a common collagenous connective tissue layer called the fascia. Each muscle bundle contains a number of muscle fibers. Each muscle fiber is lined by a plasma membrane called the sarcolemma, enclosing the sarcoplasm. Muscle fiber is a syncytium as the sarcoplasm contains many nuclei. The endoplasmic reticulum, that is sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, is the storehouse of calcium ions. A characteristic feature of the muscle fiber is the presence of a large number of parallelly arranged filaments in the sarcoplasm called myofilaments or the myofibrils. Each myofibril has an alternate dark and the light band on it. A detailed study of the myofibril has established that the striated appearance is due to the distribution pattern of two important proteins, actin and the myosin. The light band contains actin and is called I band or isotropic band, whereas the dark band called A or anisotropic band contains myosin. Both the proteins are arranged as rod-like structures parallel to each other and also to be longitudinal axis of the myofibrils. Actin filaments are thinner as compared to the myosin filaments, hence are commonly called thin and thick filaments respectively. In the center of each I band is an elastic fiber called the Z line which bisects it. The thin filaments are firmly attached to the Z line. The thick filament is the A band are also held together in the middle of this band by a thin fibrous membrane called M line. The A and I bands are arranged alternatively throughout the length of the myofibrils. The portion of the myofibril between the two successive Z lines is considered to be the functional unit of contraction and is called sarcomere. In the resting state, the edges of the thin filaments on the either side of the thick filaments partially overlap the free end of the thick filaments, leaving the central part of the thick filaments. The central part of the thick filament not overlapped by the thin filament and is called the H zone. Structure of contractile proteins. Each actin, that is thin filament, is made up of two F filamentous actins helically bound to each other. Each F actin is a polymer of monomeric G, that is globular actins. Two filament of another protein, tropomyosin, also run close to the F actins throughout its length. A complex protein, troponin, is distributed at regular interval on the tropomyosin. In the resting state, a subunit of troponin masks the active binding site for the myosin on the actin filaments. Each myosin, that is thick filament, is also a polymerized protein. Many monomeric proteins called the meromyosin constitute one of the thick filament. Each meromyosin has two important parts, a globular head with a short arm and a tail. The former being called the heavy meromyosin HMM and the latter the light meromyosin. The HMM component, that is the head and the short arm, project outward at the regular distance and angle from each other from the surface of a polymerized myosin filament and is known as cross arm. Hello? ठीक हो आप? हाँ. अच्छा ठीक हो आप आओ ना आज. The globular heads is an active ATPase enzyme and has binding site for the ATP and the active site for the actin. Mechanism of muscle contraction. Mechanism of muscle contraction is best explained by the sliding filament theory, which states that contraction of muscle fiber takes place by the sliding of thin filaments over the thick filaments. Muscles contraction is initiated by a signal sent by the central nervous system via motor neuron. A motor neuron along with the muscle fibers connected to it constitute a motor unit. The junction between a motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called the neuromuscular junction or the motor end plate. A neural signal reaching this junction releases a neurotransmitter, that is acetylcholine, which generates an action potential in the sarcolemma. This spreads through the muscle fiber and causes the release of calcium ions into the sarcoplasm. Increase in calcium level leads to the binding of calcium with the subunit of troponin on actin filaments and thereby remove the masking of active site for myosin. Utilizing the energy from ATP hydrolysis, the myosin head now binds to the exposed active site on the actin to form a cross bridge. This pulls the attached actin filaments toward the center of A band. The Z-line attached to these actins are also pulled inwards, thereby causing a shortening of the sarcomere, that is contraction. It is clear from the above steps that during shortening of the muscle, that is contraction, the I band get reduced whereas the A band retain the length. The myosin releasing the ATP and phosphate goes back to its relaxed state. A new ATP binds and the cross bridge is broken. The ATP is again hydrolyzed by the myosin head and the cycle of cross bridging formation. And the breakage is repeated, causing the further sliding. The process continues till the calcium ions are pumped back to the sarcoplasmic cisternae, resulting in the masking of actin filaments. This causes the return of Z lines back to their original position, that is relaxation. The reaction time of the fibers can vary in the different muscles. Repeated activation of the muscle can lead to the accumulation of the lactic acid due to anaerobic breakdown of the glycogen in them, causing fatigue. Muscle contains RBC, red colored oxygen storing pigment called myoglobin. Myoglobin content is high in some of the muscles, which gives a reddish appearance. Such muscles are also called red fibers. These muscles also contain plenty of mitochondria, which can utilize the large amount of oxygen stored in them for ATP production. These muscles, therefore, can also be called aerobic muscles. On the other hand, some of the muscles possess very less quantity of myoglobin and therefore appear pale or the whitish. These are the white fibers. Number of mitochondria are also few in them, but the amount of sarcoplasmic reticulum is high. They depend on anaerobic process for energy. Skeletal muscles. Skeletal system consists of a framework of bones and a few cartilages. This system has a significant role in the movement shown by the body. Imagine a chewing food without jaw bones and walking around without the limb bones. Bone and cartilage are a specialized connective tissue. The former has a very hard matrix due to calcium salts in it, and the latter has a slightly pliable matrix due to chondroitin salts. In human beings, this system is made up of 206 bones and a few cartilages. It is grouped into the two principal divisions, the axial and the appendicular skeletal. Axial skeleton comprises of 80 bones distributed along the main axis of the body. The skull, vertebral column, sternum and the ribs constitute axial skeleton. The skull is composed of two sets of bones, cranial and the facial, that totals to 22 bones. Cranial bones are 8 in number. They form the hard protective covering, cranium for the brain. The facial region is made up of 14 skeletal elements which form the front part of the skull, and a single U-shaped bone called the hyoid is present at the base of the buccal cavity, and it is also included in the skull. Each middle ear contains 3 tiny bones, that is malleus, incus and stapes, collectively called the ear ossicles. The skull region articulates with the superior region of the vertebral column with the help of 2 occipital condyles, that is dicondylic skull. Our vertebral column is formed by the 26 serially arranged units called the vertebrae and is dorsally placed. It extends from the base of the skull and constitutes the main framework of the trunk. Each vertebra has a central hollow portion, that is neural canal, through which the spinal cord passes. First vertebra is the atlas and it articulates with the occipital condyles. The vertebral column is differentiated into cervical, that is 7, thoracic, that is 12 in number, and the lumbar, that is 5 in number, and the sacral, 1, that is 1 fused, and the coccygeal, that is 1 fused region starting from the skull. The number of cervical vertebrae are 7 in almost all the mammals including human beings. The vertebral column protects the spinal cord, supports the head and serves as the point of attachment for the ribs and the musculature of the back. Sternum is a flat bone on the ventral midline of the thorax. There are 12 pairs of the ribs. Each rib is a thin flat bone connected dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum. It has 2 articulation surfaces on its dorsal end and is hence called the bicephalic. First 7 pairs of ribs are called true ribs. Dorsally, they are attached to the thoracic vertebrae and are ventrally connected to the sternum with the help of the hyaline cartilage. The 8th, 9th, and the 10th pair of ribs do not articulate directly with the sternum but join the 7th rib with the help of hyaline cartilage. These are called the vertebrochondral, that is false ribs. Last 2 pairs, that is 11th and 12th of the ribs, are not connected ventrally and therefore called the floating ribs. Thoracic vertebrae, ribs, and the sternum together form the rib cage. The bones of the limbs along with their girdles constitute the appendicular skeleton. Each limb is made up of 30 bones. The bones of the hand, that is 4 limb, are humerus, radius, and ulna carpals. Wrist bone, that is 8 in number. Metacarpals, that is palm bone, which is 5 in number, and the phalanges, that is digit, which is 14 in number. Femur, that is thigh bone, the longest bone. Tibia and the fibula tarsal, that is ankle bone, 7 in number. Metatarsal, that is 5 in number, and the phalanges, that is digit, that is 14 in number, are the bones of the legs, that is hind limb. A cup-shaped bone called patella cover the knee ventrally, that is kneecap. Pectoral and the pelvic girdle bones help in the articulation of upper and the lower limbs respectively with the axial skeleton. Each girdle is formed of 2 halves. Each half of the pectoral girdle consists of a clavicle and a scapula. Scapula is the largest triangular flat bone situated in the dorsal part of thorax between the 2nd and the 7th ribs. The dorsal flat triangular body of scapula has a slightly elevated ridge called the spine, which projects as a flat expanded process called the acromion. The clavicle articulates with this. Below the acromion is a depression called the glenoid cavity, which articulates with the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint. Each clavicle is a long slender bone with the 2 curvatures. This bone is commonly called the collarbone. Pelvic girdle consists of 2 coxal bones. Each coxal bone is formed by the fusion of 3 bones, that is ilium, ischium, and the pubis. At the point of fusion of above bones is a cavity called the acetabulum, to which the thigh bone articulates. The 2 halves of the pelvic girdle meet ventrally to form the pubis symphysis containing the fibrous cartilage. Now, joints. Joints are the essential for all types of movement involving in the bony parts of the body. Locomotory movements are no exception. Locomotory movements are no exception to this. Joints are points of contact between the bones or between the bones and the cartilages. Force generated by the muscle is used to carry out movement through this joint, where the joint acts as a fulcrum. The movability at these joints vary depending on the different factors. Joints have been classified into the 3 major structural forms, namely fibrous, cartilaginous, and the synovial. Fibrous joints do not allow any movement. This type of joint is shown by the flat skull bones, which fuse end to end with the help of dense fibrous connective tissue in the form of sutures to form cranium. In cartilaginous joints, the bones involved are jointly together with the help of cartilaginous. The joint between the adjacent vertebrae in the vertebral column is of this pattern, and it permits limited movements. Synovial joints are characterized by the presence of a fluid-filled synovial cavity between the articulating surfaces of the 2 bones. Such an arrangement allows considerable movement. These joints help in locomotion and other movements. Ball and the socket joint, that is between the humerus and pectoral girdles. Hinge joint, that is knee joint. Pivoid joint, that is between atlas and the axis. Gliding joint, that is between the carpals, and the saddle joint between the carpals and the metacarpal of thumb, and some examples. Disorders of muscular and skeletal system. Myasthenia gravis, autoimmune disorder affecting neuromuscular junction leading to fatigue, weakening, and paralysis of skeletal muscle. Muscular dystrophy, progressive degeneration of skeletal muscle mostly due to genetic disorder. Tetany, rapid spasm, that is violent contraction in the muscle due to low calcium in the body fluid. Arthritis, inflammation of joints. Osteoporosis, age-related disorder characterized by the decreased body bone mass and increased chances of fractures, decreased level of estrogens in the common cows. Gout, inflammation of joint due to the accumulation of uric acid crystals.